Hi everyone. Once again, I'm really excited to be here. My name is Maya. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Just to reiterate some things that might be important contextually, I'm a sophomore at the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. I'm studying political science and psychology with minors in Chinese, journalism, and the philosophy, politics, and economics program at Notre Dame. So I'm mostly involved on campus in mock trial, which is a pre-law activity where students and will compete as attorneys and witnesses in a simulated case. But other than that, on campus, I'm also involved in the Filipino American Student Organization, in addition to the Notre Dame debate team. So that's just a little bit about me. If you guys have any more questions with regard to on-campus things that I might be involved in or anything like that, then that can definitely come later if there's not really specific questions about the talk. But so I also, before I begin, want to give a disclaimer, which is that I have dual citizenship in the United States and the Philippines, which means that my application process did look slightly different. So, for example, I'll talk about this later on, but for financial aid, I was responsible for filling out the federal application for student aid, such that the US government also gave me money and subsidized my education accordingly. So will be a few things that are different in the processes and the manner in which I applied to colleges in the US versus you guys. But my hope is that the learnings can still be applicable in terms of how you want to navigate beginning that college process. And then although I admittedly don't have experience in doing things like applying for a visa, Camp, through other speakers and individuals, has amazing resources for something like this. So you can reach out to the camp team. There's also a few speakers, I'm sure, later on who will be able to attest to their experience in applying for these different kinds of things that I'm sure are really important. But I wanted to get that out of the way just to make sure that this talk specifically is really about the process of specifically applying to colleges. So, with regard to the process of applying to be able to go to the United States for in the first place, for example, that would definitely be different. I'm happy to entertain any questions about that circumstance, as well as any questions from somebody who might be in a similar condition or anything like that. And I'll help in any way I can with regard to questions that are from the perspective of somebody who possesses Filipino citizenship only. But like I said, I might not be as useful in that regard. So would love to entertain any questions later on. And I will talk about like any meaningful distinctions there are, if any. So, moving on, I'm here today to talk about American college admissions. So, what it means to apply to universities in the United States, broadly, how that process differs from other countries and other continents across the world, and what that process looks like for the average high school student, especially coming from the Philippines. So, in terms of requirements, what you're really wanting to start out with is the application to the universities themselves. These universities might have their applications open through a general portal, such as the Common Application or the Coalition application. I would definitely recommend starting up a Common App account just because most universities, including a vast majority of top 20 institutions, process their applications through the Common App. This means that you will have access to the essay prompts, requirements, and various submissions being requested by these universities. So it's a lot easier for you to have them just consolidated in one place. You can find information about a college's requirements and documents and things like through their websites. But like I said, having it be consolidated all on the Common App platform is really, I think, a lot more helpful and a lot more streamlined versus doing individual research. However, some universities also have their own application portals. Universities, for example, like the University of California system, utilizes a specific portal where you can only apply to schools in the University of California system through their portal. There are no other colleges that are found on that portal, and their universities are also not found on any other portal. So it's really important to do research into what universities you're applying to, decide that fairly early if possible, and then begin the process of opening up all of these accounts and things like that. I personally had a Common App account, and I think I had maybe one or two accounts for individual portals for specific universities. Aside from the application forms themselves, your requirements could look a little more different. You might have visa requirements. You might also need to prove certain things, like, for example, about your high school, and that you in that English was a medium of instruction for your academics, for example. And I'll talk about that more in this next part. But broadly, when looking at the requirements, most of these requirements will be very clearly promulgated beforehand. The Common App, like I said, is a very useful resource. And it's also, I think, really important to, once you've decided universities that you're going to apply to, really look through the requirements that they have on their web pages and discern what you might need to do in advance, and then write all of these things down and consolidate them into one place. So, for example, let's say a university requires you to fill out a specific form. I would write down just the requirements for each university that you're applying to and then see where there's overlap. So if there's an essay prompt or a certain document like a resume that's shared across universities, you won't be scrambling trying to find your latest iteration of it. So that's what kind of the requirements look like in terms of starting the process. And then, like I said, I'm sure there are a lot of different required documents and things like that for visas or any related things. But like I said, I don't have as much experience speaking on those things. So just the application forms, I think, will be able to tell you exactly what you need. And then the process of being an international student applying to US universities is consistent, fairly consistent across all universities. So you would need to prove um, you would need to apply for a visa, which lasts about 5 years, far as I know. So that's the duration of your college experience, plus maybe an internship or an allowance for a gap year, or studying abroad or extending your program or anything like that. Moving on to considerations. So the US college system is fairly unique in that I think is the most comprehensive and holistic in terms of assessing applicants and what we are supposed to do and prove in order to gain admission to these universities. So these are not necessarily in order, although this is a kind of an order that you can look at. So, for example, academics are first and foremost the most important. It's really important to have good grades. It's important to demonstrate a consistent ability to excel not only at an individual level in terms of your academics, but also in the context of the high school or the educational institution in which you came from. That's where rigor comes in. So when people talk about rigor, they mean how difficult your classes were. So, for example, I went to a local high school, ICA, and in ICA, they offered the normal strands and things like that, the standard K to 12 strands, but they also offered the international baccalaureate, which is generally seen to be more difficult or more rigorous compared to these strands. So, students who um, chose to do more rigorous programs ranging from IB, A levels, AP, these students were given higher consideration and that maybe their grades weren't as good, but they proved that they are capable of handling a difficult academic schedule. And for that reason, they were given higher consideration during the application process. So somebody who excels in a normal program and somebody who does just fairly well in a more rigorous program would likely be seen as equals in terms of rigor if that's a consideration that that university makes. And then even further, if it's somebody who's doing really well in a normal program like STEM, ABM, Humes, compared to somebody who's doing really well in what's seen as a rigorous program. So that's something that you should consider in terms of if you have options to choose for what high school you want to go to or what program you want to take, it's really important to consider that you want to demonstrate to these universities that you are capable of handling a difficult schedule. And then, secondly, in terms of academics, most American universities will also consider your rank. This is your placement in your batch relative to everybody else. So this can be useful if, for example, let's say everyone in your batch struggles with a specific test or class or something like that. In that case, you're just looking at numbers alone in terms of your personal academics. It would reflect as you having done poorly, and that might reflect poorly on you as an applicant. However, if you look at the broader context of your high school, maybe they'll see that you placed really highly, even if you had a lower average, which means that your high school likely is just a difficult institution to begin with, and it's not necessarily a problem with you. Universities want to see that you excel within the context in which you originated. And if you are doing well compared to your peers, that's an indicator that you'll thrive among other people who are just as intellectually curious and educated as you are. So, in terms of academics, those are the kind of the main considerations that I would have. Obviously, I think it's important to have good grades, but it's also really important to make sure that you one, demonstrate that you're capable of having a difficult course load, because generally course loads at US universities will be more difficult than high school. I think that's like something that you would want, right? You don't want it to be easier than high school. So you need to prove that you're willing to take that next step and that you're able to. And then you rank how you compare to other peers in your grade who are doing the same program or educational system as you are. The second consideration, which I think is honestly probably just as important for a vast majority of US universities, is extracurriculars. So, extracurriculars are very important. These are just everything you do outside of the classroom. And they range from in school extracurriculars, if you're in an organization in your school, maybe the debate team, student council, social action committee, or things like that. But they can also be things that you do outside of your school. And I think that's a really important consideration to make, because I know a lot of people feel that they're limited by the options that their high schools provide. So let's say, for example, that you want to be on the debate team, or you want to be in the Model United Nations Club, but your school doesn't have one of those. One, that's definitely understandable. And you have to understand that these US colleges have access to your high school profile, which means that they know what opportunities were presented to you. And they're not going to blame you for not taking an opportunity that was never really offered to begin with. But secondly, there is also a way for you to get involved outside of your school. You can start a nonprofit. You can join a youth organization. High school, I was active on campus. I did the school paper and the debate team. But more broadly, a lot of my extracurricular experience came from work outside school. Most of what I did was leading nonprofits, including camp in high school. So that is a really important consideration to make, where what are you doing outside of the classroom to show your prowess as an applicant? I would strongly suggest catering your extracurriculars a little bit towards your intended field of study. So, for example, I wanted to go into journalism or political science or psychology. So a vast majority of my extracurriculars were kind of centered around that, being on the debate team, being on the school paper, and working with nonprofits in order to kind of support those missions that are endemic to those fields. So that's definitely a consideration that you should make. But also, I think it's really important to do extracurriculars that you enjoy. A lot of the time, like all for example, all pre-med applicants are going to have very similar extracurriculars. They're all going to have been in the science club in high school. They're all going to have done some kind of STEM research or club or things like that. And that's just going to make it so that they all kind of look the same. But what's really important is being able to stick out. Universities don't necessarily I mean, they like well-rounded applicants. I think it's important to be a well-rounded applicant, and it's also simultaneously important to kind of have a spike in that you are demonstrating that there is something unique about you, not only, for example, that you are a pre-med student, but maybe you're a pre-med student who's specifically interested in the ethics of euthanasia, and like you want to be a double major in philosophy, something like that, right? Where it really fleshes you out as a person, and they're kind of forced to confront that fact where you have an identity or an idea that's really unique compared to other people. So if your field that you're being considered with is like 100 pre-med students, what about pre-med students who are interested in philosophy? That becomes smaller. What about pre-med students who are interested in a specific branch of political science? That becomes even smaller, like health science, health economics, things like that. So you can really get as specific as you want. And then again, I would say do extracurriculars for fun. A lot of the things I did in high school, including camp, were not necessarily to prove that I was going to be a good political science student. They were just things that I really enjoyed. And I think that that's evident in the way that you talk about them, in the way that you demonstrate your leadership capabilities. Because if you really love an organization, it will be obvious to everyone who's there. And you're far more likely to be promoted throughout the ranks and get leadership positions, which is really the key when you're doing extracurriculars. It's definitely about quality and not quantity. You want to make sure that you have that really strong quality to your application. And again, that leads me to the next part, which is essays. Essays are a pretty broad part of the application. Each university has different prompts and ideas that they want you to write about. So your essays will range from, I think the shortest essay prompt I had was literally 3 words, to your personal statement, which would be slightly longer. And there's just a lot of different types of essays that you'll be writing, and these are also really strongly considered. I would definitely suggest asking as many people as possible to proofread your essays. It's not cheating. You're not doing it in front of computer being timed or being watched. So asking as many people as possible who you really trust and who you think know you and will be able to opine on whether or not an essay shows your true self is really important. It's very, very important to not have typos, not have grammatical errors in your essay, but it's even more important to have an essay that shows who you really are. I have friends who have gotten to top universities with like very minor typos in their essays. I don't again, I don't think that that should be something where you're like, oh, it's okay to have a typo. But I think what's more important is having an essay that really speaks to who you are as an applicant. And then other standardized tests. The SAT and the ACT are the main ones. However, they're currently a slightly lower in popularity compared to before I applied. So during COVID, they definitely a lot of universities removed their SAT requirement, and that is still in effect for a lot of them, but it is coming back. I would do research into whether the specific universities you're interested in applying in require the SAT or the ACT, and then go from there. Some of the universities that I wanted to attend explicitly required the SAT, so I still took it. And then you might need to prove, for example, that you can speak English if you come from the Philippines, for which you would need to take the TOEFL or any other English certification test. You can also just ask your high school to provide a certificate of English as the medium of instruction if they teach in English, and it will likely be waived. Identity is kind of a minor one, consideration of whether or not you are a legacy. Your race might be considered because in terms of like if they do affirmative action, diversity quotas, things like that. And then lastly, there's also interviews. Some universities do interviews. I would say that the US interview process is not as cutthroat, competitive, or professional compared to some other countries. Most of the interviews I did for American universities were very informal. And I think that that's more of a conversation where you're trying to get your true self across compared to something where it's a very professional setting. But it definitely differs from university to university, and I would try to figure that out. There's a few more considerations that US colleges use. I would definitely recommend um, picking your top universities and then searching up their common data sets. Common data sets are essentially statistics on a university's acceptance and enrollment and applications. And they include, for example, what factors they consider in college applications and how important they are. So, for example, for Notre Dame, rigor was very, very important. And it was a lot more important compared to, for example, identity. So, I think that's just a really convenient way for you to be able to find that out. Next, just a brief timeline overview. In the summer, US applications for colleges open. Early decision and early action are essentially these processes where you can apply to a university early and in turn learn of your condition of admittance or your admittance at all early as well. Usually these are due in November, and then you'll be notified in mid-December about your acceptance. early decision is binding. If you were accepted into the university, you will have to attend. Early action is not. You were just notified early of your admission to the university, but you're not legally obligated to attend. The regular decision is also not a legal obligation. You apply anywhere from January to March, and then you'll be notified from March to April about your admissions decision. And usually, US colleges will require you to commit or to say no to their offer of admission by the 1st of May. That's just a general overview. It ranges from college to college, but that's something that you can just keep in mind. And I'm fairly certain that almost all applications, if not all, for US universities are currently open. In terms of financial aid, there's a few different things that you can look at. There's need-based scholarships through which you can through which you can avail of financial aid in terms of your socioeconomic status. Through that, you would be applying through the CSS profile, which is a form that you can fill out online. It's fairly easy to fill out, but you will need your parents or your guardian or whoever is your familiar provider to fill that out with you because it asks a lot about income and things like that. And then there's also merit-based aid. Not all universities give merit-based aid, but merit-based aid is financial aid on the basis that you had significant accomplishments in high school. So, for example, as a Hasburg USCO scholar, my financial aid is specifically with regard to merit, to what things I did in high school. And I'm happy to talk about that more if anyone has any questions. Lastly, this is going to be really quick so that I have time for questions. If any of you have any questions about the daily life and like culture shocks coming to the US, I'd be happy to answer them. I think that it really depends on person to person if you're able to adapt. I do think there are a lot of resources and opportunities for high schoolers from the Philippines and international students broadly to be able to adapt. It was certainly a shocking process, and I don't deny that it was a difficult transition, but it's something that literally thousands of people have done before you. So there's a huge network of people, including everyone here at camp, who's experienced that exact same thing. So any questions about that, I'd be happy to entertain. With that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. I'm going to drop my email in the chat. So if any of you have any specific questions that you want me to entertain, I'd be happy to do so. But I highly encourage asking questions now, just in case if somebody has the same question as you, then I'd be able to entertain that as well. So thank you guys. And with that, I'm done for now, unless anyone has any questions.
All right, everyone. So similar to a while ago, we'll be once again opening the next 5 minutes for any questions from the audience. So if you guys have any questions, just feel free to type in the chat box below so that we can be able to relate to our speaker.
Okay. So the first question I got here is what are your extracurriculars and awards during high school that you think helped you in your applications? That's a great question. Thank you. So, oh, and the question right after this is linked as well. What do you think was the number one thing that got you in? I would definitely say extracurriculars. My grades in high school were absolutely not straight A's. I did not have straight A's. I did not have perfect grades by any means, but I had extracurriculars that I think really spoke to who I was as a person, what I believed in, and what I wanted to get out of my university experience. So in terms of extracurriculars, I was captain of the debate team in high school. I was also managing editor of my school paper. Then I directed 4 nonprofits during high school, a youth organization, a feminist organization, camp, a organization, and an organization that helped underprivileged students learn how to speak publicly and conduct like debates. So those were my extracurriculars. And then I also did an internship with a government agency, the Philippine Competition Commission. That was really helpful, I think, in demonstrating my interest to work in government as a political science student. So really having extracurriculars that were geared one towards my interests, I think was very important. But two, I had leadership positions in all of these extracurriculars. I did not submit information on extracurriculars that I was just a member in because one, I just didn't have space, and two, I barely had any. I really prioritized joining organizations and clubs in which I could secure a membership position because I knew that that would really stand out. And that is the reason I got my scholarship. So the scholarship that I have at Notre Dame is specifically for leadership. It's given to people who excel in terms of their extracurriculars and made a like sizable, incredible impact in their local communities. So my work with nonprofits and the leadership that I demonstrated through those nonprofits is the reason I got that scholarship. It is like that's not even just I think, like I know that because it's been explicitly told to me. So yeah. Based on the education you were able to avail of in the Philippines, do you think you were behind compared to your peers in college or somehow advanced? Definitely advanced because I took the International Baccalaureate. I will say that it is a intensely rigorous and difficult program, but it is a very, very good one. And I am so blessed to have taken it, especially because I went to a local high school. I didn't ever think that I'd be able to take an international diploma, but I ended up being the third overall cohort in ICA to be able to take the IB and the first ever to take the actual exams. So I think am definitely more I don't necessarily say advanced, but I'm a lot better prepared for specific college things like writing really long essays, conducting research, things like that. I'm more prepared for. I wouldn't necessarily be able to speak on being from a strand or anything like that because I didn't take those in high school. But to my understanding, most of my friends who did STEM, ABM, and things like that are also faring fairly well. Filipinos, I think, just do pretty well in the education system compared to the broad spectrum of applicants. Before I continue with the next question for the camp team, please like just stop me at any point if you need me to stop going because I'm just reading off the questions. Okay. How did you choose your university? I had a lot of considerations. The main one was that Notre Dame gave me a very sizable scholarship. That for me was really important. I didn't want to impose an extremely significant financial burden on my family in choosing my university, and that was very important to me. Other than that, there were also everything about Notre Dame kind of just stood out to me. It wasn't my dream school, actually. I had a dream school. I got deferred, and then I started just applying to universities that were similar to that school so that I could transfer later on. But then I kind of realized when I got into Notre Dame, and Notre Dame actually paid for me to visit, they paid for my flight, hotel, transportation, food, everything. I realized that it had everything that my dream university had, plus a lot of other things that I had not considered that I wanted. It's in the Midwest, which a lot of people think is kind of the middle of nowhere, but I like because it's a lot safer compared to, in my perception, at least like New York or Chicago. It's also Catholic. I am not a religious person, but I enjoy the study of theology, and I really wanted to go to a school where I could continue studying theology, even if I major it, because I just don't have space for that. As you guys know, I literally am double majoring, triple minoring right now. I'm definitely gonna drop one of those, but at the moment, that's what it's looking like, and I just didn't have the space, and I wanted to be able to study that. Um, and then again, Notre Dame being a top 20 was always a really strong consideration for me. I knew that if I was going to leave the Philippines, it would have to be for a university that, in my view, could provide an unparalleled education. I was very blessed to receive admission to the best colleges in the Philippines. I got into UP Diliman. I got a merit scholarship at Ateneo. And for me, I kind of realized that if I was going to turn down those options, it would have to be for a reason. I was not one of the people who believed that I needed to go to university in the US, no matter what university it was. It was definitely something that I considered very thoroughly in order to make sure that I was making a rational choice, because I do plan on coming back to the Philippines after I receive my education and after some time working abroad. And I knew that I would only really make the best use of my education if it was an unparalleled one that I could not receive anywhere else. In the award section, can we submit certificates of participation? I think that is not encouraged. You can look at the specific content of the websites that are there. But broadly, I don't believe those are encouraged. Usually they ask you to only submit specific awards that you received. Um, Regarding financial aid, what suggestions would you recommend to help students have average income status? I would definitely recommend just disclosing all of your financial assets and things like that during the application. It is like fully important. It's important to fully be transparent and honest because these universities will really help you and work hand in hand with you. A tip is to really look for universities that claim to meet 100% of demonstrated need. If you can demonstrate that you really need this financial aid, most universities in the US will commit to fulfilling that. Um, did you take IB? Yes. I would recommend it if you're wanting to study abroad. And then what does US think of local strands? So it's definitely not seen as highly as rigorous programs like the IB, but I don't think that they're necessarily frowned on. Um, okay, for any essay questions, feel free to reach out because I'm happy to talk about those. I loved writing essays. I also love proofreading them. I think I proofread over 100 essays for peers throughout my time in high school. So feel free to reach out. Scholarships in Notre Dame open to US citizens only or international students as well. They're open to international students. My citizenship status was not considered in giving my scholarship. And there are people who receive the scholarship from all over the world. Does IB look better in the eyes of admissions officers compared to other SHS programs? Yes, it is more rigorous, so it is naturally seen as a little bit better. Do my extracurriculars have to be related to the course I'm applying for it to have an effect on my application? I would say you should have a few that are related for sure, and your most involved ones should be related, but you also can have ones that aren't completely related. I don't think that will damage your application at all. I still have a few more questions here. Camp team, am I able to keep going or like I think the time is up, so I should probably like let me know.
Hi. All right, guys. Thank you so much, and also Maya for answering these questions, and also for participating.